I'm glad to be joined by Dr. Lassina Zerbo, the Executive Secretary of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Organization. Hello, sir. And also Hans Blix, the former Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Welcome to Moscow, gentlemen, and a very good evening to you. So let's get straight to business. Soon it's going to be 20 years since the United Nations adopted the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. Let's just compare the state of nuclear security around the world, and let's use several milestones. For example, the Cold War era, the post-Cold War era, when the treaty itself was adopted by the UN, and now. So how can we compare those three stages, those 3 years?
I think that during the Cold War was the most dangerous period. Then there were over 50,000 nuclear warheads in the world. And we had a very near nuclear holocaust after the Cuban crisis in 1962. Right after the end of the Cold War, when we had glasnost and we had a change and détente came, the end of the Cold War, that was the best moment. We had really sort of harvest of disarmament at the time. The Convention Against Chemical Weapons was entered in that time. President Bush and Gorbachev agreed between themselves to do away with lots of chemical nuclear weapons. And we had, of course, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty in 1996. And the year before that, we had a prolongation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which has most countries in the world as parties. So that was the great time. Since then, we have had hopes that the countries would go on. And with President Obama and the declaration that he hoped for a nuclear weapon-free world, we were all very thrilled. But since that time, 2010, when the agreement was reached between Russia and the United States about the START Treaty, reducing the number of nuclear weapons and carriers, weapons carriers, since then things have gone badly. And the atmosphere in the world has become very, very chilly. And I would say right now we are in a phase of rearmament. Bigger sums of money are devoted in Russia, in the United States, China, India, many other countries. So we need, I think, to come to something new. And the celebration of the 20 years after this treaty, the CTBT, I think is a good occasion for the big powers, members of the Security Council, to do something about it. And we have some ideas, Lassina and I, what should be done.
Okay, well, Chile sounds quite pessimistic, but maybe not as much. So are we really taking steps back here, and who's making more steps backwards?
Step backwards, I would say, let me first say that what Dr. Blix just mentioned is, the history of where the CTBT came from and then where we are today. It is true that the horizon is not that bright. When you look at what's happening right now, North Korea is still testing, the CTBT not yet in force or yet to enter into force, no leadership, strong leadership that will bring the parties together to discuss ways of finding a roadmap towards the entry into force of the treaty as a strong background to any issue with regard to arms control, international peace and stability. You mentioned nuclear security. I'm of the view that when we talk nuclear security, we should be able to take it in a holistic manner. All aspects in arms control, non-proliferation, disarmament, that lead the process to developing nuclear weapon, or fearing the fact that nuclear material, fissile material in the end of terrorists, we should take this all together in a comprehensive manner, the same way the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty were brought for signature in '96. This is how I see the situation right now. Unless we put all those elements together, if we focus on stovepiping issues, we'll never advance arms control and non-proliferation.
At the same time, of course, we have to look very specifically into the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. And right now, I think there are special reasons to do it, because we see fears in the Russia, that the United States is moving on with the modernization of their nuclear weapons. We see a fear in the United States that Russia might also be moving on, and fear in both places that the Chinese may be doing the same thing. So right now we are in a situation where someone could say that no, the treaty is not in force and we need to test. And that would be very bad, because then we are really into a new nuclear weapons race. And we would need, therefore, to get these countries together to stop it. And I think there are ways in which we could be done, some encouraging points. Now, take the cooperation that happened between Russia and the United States about the use in Syria of chemical weapons a couple of years ago. Now, the US and Russia together managed to stop this and eliminate the chemical weapons, and they got the whole Security Council to come along. Secondly, we had the Iranian affair, Iranian nuclear program, and again, Russia and the United States were at the core of it, together with the Europeans and all the other members of the Security Council, and the problem was solved. And we have now something approved by the Security Council. And the latest thing is, of course, the cooperation between Russia and the United States about a ceasefire in Syria. We don't know whether it will hold, but here are 3 cases in which we have, despite all the disagreements in other areas, we have cooperation. And I think that's what should be started now to stop any risk of further testing and to bring the treaty into force.
But we're talking about countries potentially upgrading their nuclear arsenals. We're talking about the nuclear superpowers. You've also mentioned terrorists. You've mentioned Iran and North Korea. But where do you believe the biggest threats to security or the biggest fears come from?
Look, right now, I would say the international community sees the biggest threat from terrorists acquiring fissile material to develop dirty bombs. It is true, it's a big threat. But that current big threat shouldn't hide the unfinished business that we started long ago. Is the treaty, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, in force? Have we advanced with regard to the NPT? The 2015 review conference was considered to not have been a success. So where do we go from here? Those are all issues that we have to take into proceeding with any nuclear security business. That's my personal feeling. You say, what's the biggest stress? With North Korea testing and with what Dr. Bliss is saying, that the risk that we start another arms race, it is a big threat too. So where do we draw the line? Are the terrorists a more concerning situation for the international community right now? Yes, but it is a reason to neglect other issues with regard to weapon of mass destruction and nuclear weapon? I don't think so.
There is a tendency among the great powers to say that we are very responsible. We cannot be the danger. It's these terrorists who might get hold of some little plutonium and make a bomb or make a dirty bomb. They are the dangerous ones. Well, but we should really remember that there are something like a little less than 20,000 nuclear warheads still around, and they are not in the hands of terrorists. They are in the hands of the big powers, and the big powers are actually flying pretty close to each other. I mean, the military have their body language, and we see it over the Baltic, over the North Sea, and from military body language you can have sparks flying. So that's a very dangerous thing. The terrorists, yes, the conference in Washington recently is an important step to try to keep track of all the plutonium or the cesium or cobalt, etc. But something like 20,000 nuclear weapons in big powers, that is not to be forgotten.
I understand that, but many of our viewers would really like experts as competent as you to focus on the possibility of creating some kind of dirty bomb by organizations like the Islamic State. Can you please elaborate a little bit more on that? What are the chances of something as terrible as that happening in, let's say, the near future?
Well, you can hardly ever say that your risks are zero in almost anything you have. I mean, they use cobalt, they use cesium in hospitals in many places, and they could theoretically try to put some such things together. The risk, I would say, is very small, but it's not zero. And you would also remember that one should not see a dirty bomb as something equal to a nuclear bomb. A nuclear bomb is something horrendous. We know from Hiroshima and Nagasaki what it is. A dirty bomb is a terror weapon. It will create contamination. but it will have far from the effects of a nuclear weapon. So yes, it's bad, but we have to see the dimensions of the different cases, and the nuclear bombs, that's much worse.
Do you have anything to add on that?
But I mean, I think what I want to add on this is that shows again the importance of linking the two, and not saying that we're focusing today on dirty bombs and then forgetting the danger of the nuclear weapon themselves. So until we do that, we tend to only go towards the terrorists and dirty bomb, and then forget what I've been calling for so long now, the unfinished business that is yet to be solved. So how do we put the two together? To put the two together, we have a nuclear security summit, potentially or probably a success. But where do we go from here? We have 13 June, the 20th anniversary of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty in Vienna, the same way the international community got together to solve the climate change issue in Paris, the same way they got together to have the Iran deal, the same way they got together in Washington to deal with nuclear security, it's the same way they should get together in Vienna to bring the discussion on North Korea and link it to the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty to find a diplomatic solution to this issue, getting a moratorium on nuclear testing that is strong and that is accepted by all as we work towards the entry into force of this treaty. That's a solution that we're proposing.
You are saying they should. You keep saying things like they should. But at the same time, Russia was not present at the Nuclear Security Summit in Washington. Then there are many things Moscow is blaming the United States for. For example, stuff like the reluctance to ratify the CTBT, also the things President Putin was saying about the failure to destroy its stock of weapons-grade plutonium, and there are tensions and some kind of arguments going on with Russia about this. Also, there are reports in the media that America is quietly upgrading its nuclear arsenal, and the sums mentioned in those reports are enormous, like a $1 trillion program, for example. So you are saying they should, again, but are we really coming closer in these kind of elements that, again, should be going closer to this kind of cooperation as it is happening in the other fields you mentioned?
Well, I think Lassina is saying that you have an opportunity ahead of you. We have heard from Russia that they would like to have the treaty into force, and Russia has ratified it, as has the United Kingdom and France, whereas China and the United States has not. And they both stand in front of the risk that the laboratory work that's been going on, surely in Russia, and surely in the United States and China, that the pressure that they will test these new things. So I think the initiative to use the 13th of June, the 20th year, to bring the treaty in force would be good. This has been a treaty that has been operative but not in force, which is better than having a treaty that is in force and not operative. But now we would like to have it both in force and operative.
Well, really, I mentioned these kind of things because they are really important for the people here in Russia. I understand that they're also important for people all around the world.
Yes.
But as experts, what things can you say specifically about this upgrade program where so much money is involved? And also, as experts, is it a failure by Washington to destroy its stock of weapons-grade plutonium? Because Vladimir Putin was saying that they're doing it in a manner when they can somehow transfer it back to weapons-grade plutonium. As experts, can you please elaborate on that a little bit more?
I think much of this work is secret, after all. They don't tell us where they are going. We know that it
But I'm sure you know something about it.
No, not more than what is published. I'm not sitting in the government, nor am I in the CIA or in the FSB. I'm not so well informed as they are. But I can see that they should have joint interest in stopping it, because it's playing with fire.
Look, we've heard a lot about modernization. Let me go step back a little bit when you say why we say should. We say should because it was to Dr. Bliss and myself, the CTBT would be enforced today. And then if it was for two of us, we'll probably advance more on the non-proliferation treaty. Trust me, because we believe in non-proliferation and ultimately disarmament. But we say should because those who have the capability to reduce their nuclear arsenal and those whose decisions remain with regard to the ratification of the CTBT, those are the people we're talking to. You have 8 countries, which ratification is still important for this important treaty to enter into force. President Putin has talked about Russia's commitment at a time where some were doubting that Russia may pull out of this treaty and resume underground testing. I got assurance from President Putin. He said it again. We've published an op-ed with Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov to talk about Russia's commitment and then some of the opportunity in the Korean Peninsula as well as the Middle East. So we talk about those leaders to do something, to come together, and we're giving them a platform in Vienna on June 13 to bring maybe an embryonic 6-party talk in Vienna. Why not? Talking about North Korea, trying to find a diplomatic solution around the comprehensive test ban treaty.
We are not only saying that they should, we're also maintaining that it is in their own interest to do so. It's not just in our interest, but in the world's and their own interest. And let me make another point here, and that is that it's assumed that many of these efforts in the laboratory is to miniaturize the nuclear bombs. You have these huge things, but if they make them smaller, then the fear is that the threshold against the use may be not as high. This was a discussion many years ago, and now they are back again at these small weapons, and that is very risky for everybody, for themselves. So we think it's in their interest as well as in the world's interest, and to define how ratification will come about.
If it's in everyone's interest, why are we taking steps backwards?
Well, I think there's not the confidence on the other side. And of course, the work in laboratories will go on. That cannot prevent. I don't think we can have inspection in the laboratories on the other side. So that will go on. And that is why it's particularly important to say that you can do that, but you cannot test. A ban on testing puts also some lid on what you can do in laboratories.
And backwards, I think backwards come from the apparent or practical lack of trust that is between the superpower right now, and then the perception that we might go back to the Cold War. That's where this backwards situation is coming from. But as Dr. Blix said, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty offers 2 things. Stopping vertical proliferation, meaning stopping people from developing more powerful bomb, and then being focused at the time to laboratory testing. But you can do laboratory testing for as long as you can, but you, at some point, modeling needs experiment. And if testing is an experiment that we stop, you won't be able to go as far in your development or modernization. And that's what we're offering vertically. Horizontally, we're offering to stop countries from developing more and more nuclear weapons. And that's why the Test Ban Treaty is important, and that's why it's important to resume discussion with North Korea so that they could stop testing. Because the more they test, the more they develop a stronger capability with regard to nuclear weapons.
There is also something new compared to the 1996 when Mr. Clinton was rebuffed in the Senate, and that is that the organization that Lassina Zerbo is heading has now a system of verification that the world can trust that they would discover if anyone were to test the weapon. And that was a major objection in the Senate in 1996. And I think everybody recognizes that today that is not a valid objection.
Well, you said that a lot of this laboratory work is being done in secret, but let me just go back to this weapons-grade plutonium issue, because Vladimir Putin was talking about it, and if he's talking about it, that means maybe it's not that much of a secret. And also, what's important about this is, as far as I understand, we're talking about a bilateral agreement between Russia and the United States, right? So.
No, I think what we have in mind is getting a ratification by the US and by China and all the others to bring the treaty into force. Russia has already ratified, so it's not just a US Russian question, but I think that they can form the nucleus. They can help each other here as they did as regards the chemical weapons in Syria. They can take the lead.
So destroying or eliminating this weapons-grade plutonium is part of a bigger treaty?
Well, it's part of a greater effort, but destroying plutonium is not a necessary ingredient in a comprehensive test ban. Japan is a party to the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. They have plenty of plutonium.
But I'm talking about those agreements that were reached between Moscow and Washington in the early years of the last decade. So we're talking about Russia accusing the United States of not, basically not meeting the terms of those agreements by creating some kind of other facility. What Putin is saying, that Russia has this facility and it's standing up to its promises, while the Americans are not.
Well, they were agreeing that they would do away with redundant quantities of plutonium, and I was around because at the IAEA I was then advocating something we call a trilateral agreement, under which the US and Russia would agree to do away with the plutonium or enriched uranium that was redundant, and the IAEA would verify it. And it was plausible at that time in the 90s, but in the present atmosphere it has not been plausible. Okay,
so you mentioned two dates that are very important in this particular case, I guess, the sad history of nuclear development. We are edging closer towards the 30th anniversary of the Chernobyl catastrophe, and as far as I understand, things aren't that clear and aren't that safe as many people would think, because there are still issues with the sarcophagus and also the international efforts in that regard, because some people say it is still a long way to go. Would you agree with that, or think?
No, I don't think so. I hope to be in the Ukraine on the 30th anniversary and be at Chernobyl. I was in a helicopter that was given by the Russia and Ukraine in 1986 and was with Mr. Vyelikov over the destroyed reactor and saw the smoke coming up. And since 1997 I have been the chairman of the international group of states that are financing the building of the new sarcophagus, it's called. We call it a shelter, actually. It's a huge construction, an engineering miracle. It's so big that it could house the St. Paul's Cathedral, over 120 meters long and the same height. And this will ensure that there will be no radioactivity coming out in the next 100 years. And within that period, it's calculated that they will be able to take care of the radioactive masses that are inside. So I think there will be a safe building, and I'm glad also to say that Russia is helping to finance it. The major money comes from the European Union, from the United States. Russia is also participating, and I think that's very welcome.
Okay, so, but would you still say that the humanity have learned their lessons after Chernobyl?
Well, Chernobyl was a wound, a bleeding wound for the nuclear power in the world. And I'm in favor of nuclear power, and I also would compliment Russia on its achievement in nuclear power. You have a very good technology, very competitive in India, in Vietnam, Turkey, even Turkey, many other places, to sell nuclear power reactors to Finland. So Russia has a fine technology. The reactor in Chernobyl, the RBMK, was one that had great weaknesses and it was handled badly, unwisely. But otherwise, Russia has a breadth. You have the nuclear power, the icebreakers up in the north that are gone in the most harshest climate of the world and has been very successful. So I'm in favor of the use of nuclear, not least because it gives us vast amount of electric energy without adding to the climate change, without the carbon dioxide emissions. However, it has to be safe and it has to be reliable. And I think Chernobyl taught us lessons, so did Fukushima.
That's what I was going to ask about, because many times I've heard people say that the humanity would never forgive another Chernobyl for the nuclear industry, and then we have Fukushima happening.
Well, that's partly true. You take Germany, had excellent nuclear reactors, and perhaps 20% of Germany's electricity came from it, and they closed it all. And now they're using more coal. and more wind power to be sure, more solar power, etc. Switzerland too decided that they would phase out nuclear power. Italy didn't dare to go back. In my own country, Sweden, there is a big debate about it. So the Fukushima had a great effect. Still, I think that it's inevitable that nuclear will be used as some of the renewables, like solar power is getting cheaper, getting more efficient, and wind power as well is getting cheaper. But nuclear power would be madness of the world, I think, to forego.
I will step back a little bit. Since Dr. Bliss is talking about his country, Sweden, if I take it from a developing country perspective, when you talk about nuclear energy, the tendency is that the big players want to have nuclear energy and then not letting the developing country having. That's not true. The developing country, every country under the NPT has a right to have nuclear energy for peace. Dr. Bliss mentioned security, surety. This is what we need with nuclear energy and safety so that we don't get into a situation where we have Chernobyl in the long run or Fukushima. So how do we create those conditions in the developing country for them to have nuclear energy in a safe manner? Those are the conditions that the International Atomic Energy Agency is working for and towards. But then, when you have that, where do you draw the line from nuclear energy for peace and then the possibility that country may have to say, why don't I go towards enriching uranium in a way where I can have the nuclear weapon capability? And that's where it comes in the CTBT, and this is how we complement the IAEA in its verification.
And the fissile material.
Yeah, in the fissile material, and the fissile material kind of treaty too. So that's how I bring again this notion or this concept of not stove, the holistic approach or not stovepiping issues. When you take this process, the process to have nuclear energy, the process to develop nuclear weapon, and the process to stop the development of nuclear weapon, all those entities need to work together and then to cooperate. And that's where nuclear security comes in. And this is why I still believe that we cannot talk about nuclear security without having all those aspects linked.
Okay. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and for your expert opinion.
Thank you.